Okay, so let's talk a bit about fly lines. When you pull a fly line off, some lines are going to have memory, and they're made on a stiffer core like that, and they just need a stretch. And some lines are going to be really limp and supple and lie naturally, and they're on a braided core. And a core, strength of a core is anything from 12 pounds is about the weakest fly line you make, up to about 80 pounds, depending on the species you're targeting, whether you're fishing freshwater or exotic sharks and sailfish, then they're on really strong cores. The coatings are liquid PVC, which is what this stuff is. And when you put a liquid PVC, when you make a fly line out of liquid PVC, on its own, that would make a fly line, it would sink and would be a clear intermediate. So when you want a line to do other things than sink, you add floating compounds. This is a thing called a microsphere. If I'll tap it, you'll see. Microspheres are tiny hollow glass balls that you put into the coating to make them float. And then when you want to make them sink, you use powdered tungsten. And the reason there's a huge tube of that and a tiny tube of this is that these weigh the same amount. So that's the same weight as that. Yeah, so volume. So when you want to make a line sink faster, you have to have fast sinking materials, and they will make them heavier, which is one downside with fly lines, right? One of the things about fly lines, you'll see here, I'm sure you know about the industry standard, right? A 5-weight, a 6-weight, a 7-weight, all those kind of things. So when you add more weight, you're going to change the weight of a fly line. So one of those things you've got to change is how do you change density and weight? And we're not even going to worry about that yet. What we are going to talk about is this simple thing here. So a fly line, I'm sure you all know it. Maybe you don't. I'm going to kind of cover the basics. Fly line has a code, and a code tells you everything that a fly line is. The first two letters are, you can see them on the box. This one says WF8F. It's W8F, 8F. And so what that is, the first two letters tell you the shape. I'm sure you know this, but I'm just filling in gaps in case you don't know this. A WF is a weight forward. It's a fly line that's got a fat head and a skinny running line. And a DT, a line that says DT, come on, my graphics are messed up. A line that's DT, this is the double taper shape. Right, so that is a line that has two tapers. The difference is a weight forward has a running line. That is the absolutely most important part to understand. And when we come on to that in a moment, we're going to talk about perhaps the most important thing in fly line casting is this little section here. But right now, all we need to know is that WF would be a weight forward line and a DT would be a double taper line. It's the shape of the line. Then there's a number, and the number relates to its size. Right, so when you pick up a fly rod's going to say a 4-weight or a 6-weight or an 8-weight, and that line in theory should match. And then there's a letter at the very end of the code. F would be a floating line, I would be an intermediate, S would be a sinking. If there's a number after the S, it means how many inches per second that line sinks. So an S3 sinks at 3 inches a second, 6 sinks at 6 inches a second. And then even more confusing is you have lines with multiple letters, float and intermediate, float, hover intermediate, float, sink 3. You get lines with sinking tips, which I'm sure you all know. And if I'm whizzing through it because I just want to cover the basics quick before we get to the nitty gritty. But if there's anything that doesn't make sense, just ask and I'll slow down and clarify. So as I say, really, when you've got your code, the double letters aim at the shape, the number is the weight, and the last letter is the density, whether it floats or sinks up there. And so that's what the code is. Now, the components of a fly line, let's just get rid of all these bloody graphics. I should have checked these graphics first. Come on, ding, dong, dang. When you look at fly lines, there's a front taper, there's a body, and there's a rear taper. And all together, that is called the head. And we're going to talk about head lengths in a minute, so it's quite important to understand what the head is. You all right up there? Can you see? Quite important to understand what the head is. We're going to talk about the head in big detail in a minute. So when I talk about the head, if you know what the head is, it's the whole fat bit, and then the skinny bit behind is the running line. And then a double taper, that has just front taper, body, and rear taper. Some people know that the reason you have a double taper is you can turn it around. And there's some truth to that. You can't turn the weight forward around because the skinny bit's at the front end. But a double taper, you turn it round, and an awful lot of people think that misconception is because you turn it around because the front end starts to wear out. And so you turn it around and you use a new line. A fly line lasts about 5 years. So that's an awful long time for it to wear out before you turn it around. It came from the old days when lines were made of silk, and you fish a silk line for about 4 hours and then it gets waterlogged and starts to sink. And then you turn it around and have your floating end again. So that's why a double taper was created, so you have a turnable line. Nowadays with modern chemicals you don't even need to worry about that. Nowadays a double taper is a particular line you use for technical dry fly fishing. The most important part, there's two things really to understand in fly lines. One is the weight, and a fly line's weight is based on 30 feet. So this is where it's going to get a little kind of in-depth and technical. A fly line's weight is based at 30 feet of line. So you pull off 30 feet of line, and as it tells you up here, if you have 30 feet of line weighs 120 grains, it's a 4 weight. That's a standard. If it weighs 140 grains, it's a 5 weight. If it weighs 160 grains, it's a 6 weight. So it's a standard that all line manufacturers know about. I wasn't going to say follow, but they know about. And what's interesting is to give a kind of concept of that is that every trout line, bless you, differs by 20 grains over 30 feet. That number is an important number because this is a grain scale here, and if you weigh a business card, this business card weighs 23 grains. So the difference between a 5 weight line and a 6 weight line is that business card over 30 feet. You know, it's a tiny, tiny amount. People get really excited about, oh, you can't put a 6 weight line on a 5 weight rod, you'll overload it. Or you can't put a 5 weight line on a 6 weight rod, you'll underload it. Well, it's a business card. It's so little in amount, the difference between those two lines, you probably really shouldn't worry about that too much. And there's a reason I'm telling you that, because some lines, we make a line at RIO that is 3 line sizes heavier than it says. We make a line and we call it a 5 weight, and we make it as an 8 weight and stick it in a 5 weight packet. And it's like, most people think, well, you're liars. What are you doing that for? Why are you putting an 8 weight line in my 5 weight package? And there's a reason, and that reason is about performance of what you're trying to achieve, which is really where this is, in a very roundabout way, is trying to go. So the other interesting fact is that a line's size changes 1 line size every 5 feet beyond 30. You didn't expect to come to math school here, right? I'm guessing you didn't, and that's why there's a lot of numbers around. But if the industry standard is 30 feet, right, and you pull off 30 feet of line and you make a cast, that is the line perfectly loaded for that rod and that line combo. If you pull out 5 feet more, which is not a huge amount. I mean, this is about 5 feet, it's about that. That has added a whole line size in weight. So your 5 weight is no longer a 5 weight. Right? 35 feet of 5 weight is a 6 weight. And then you put out another 5 feet. It's not much more of a cast, that's probably about 5 feet. Now it's a 7 weight. And you put out another 5 feet, and now it's an 8 weight. So a 5 weight rod.
Sensation, you feel.
Yeah.
You actually feel
more weight in the rod, right? The load, more line. And what happens, the rod bends further down. So a rod, the way a rod is designed, obviously a long taper. So when you have a light weight, only the tip is moving. When you have a medium weight, it flexes further down. When you have a heavy weight, it flexes down to the butt. So a rod is designed to take multiple weights. And that's hugely important, because if you had to match a 5 weight line on a 5 weight rod, it would mean you'd only cast 30 feet. And there's plenty of times when you're casting 10 feet, and plenty of times when you're casting 60 feet, right? You need different lengths of line. So again, the comprehension here is to understand it doesn't really matter if your line is 1 size heavy or 2 sizes heavy. The rod will take it very admirably. What it does matter, where it matters, is when we take a look at Da, da, da. Let's just skip all this rubbish. Da, da, da. Mention that. Why do we need to know this? Don't choose a line size because the rod says so. You choose the line to maximize performance. Now, why I mention that? Here is a game. And this game is, imagine you stood a brick up, just a regular household brick. And you're at one of these fun fairs where they charge you £5 to win a goldfish, and you can never do it because I know you can't hit the dart in the playing card or throw the ball in the fish bowl or whatever it is. But this one, there's a brick standing up, and there's 3 cricket balls here, and the sign says £1, 3 balls, knock the brick down, and you win £100, and you're only 5 feet away. And so most people will go, oh yeah, I could do that. And you pay £1, and the chap reaches down and gives you a table tennis ball. And there's no way you can throw that hard enough to knock the brick down. The only way you can knock the brick down, I just come back from America, so I got a baseball, not a cricket ball. So change it for me cricket ball. But anyway, it's a baseball, same concept. The only way you could knock that brick down is use a heavy enough ball. And what that introduces in fly casting is perhaps the most important term to consider: mass moves mass. To knock that brick down, you would choose a heavy ball. Right? And so when you take flies, for example, and away these flies. So here is a streamer. It's called a skittish smoke. Great on the bow. Great on the bow. This one weighs 14 grains. I'll just give you a number. And then you take your streamer off because you're not catching anything in your streamer. You put on a little spider like this or a small dry fly. It doesn't even register. It's not even 0.1 of a grain. It's so tiny. So the point is, most people when they fish for trout will swap between flies like this and flies like this and use the same outfit and expect to have the same end result. And if you're a heavy streamer angler and you fish a lot of weighted flies like these big cone heads and dumbbell eye, things like that, you need to choose a line that's more like the cricket ball. You need to choose a line with a lot more power because you're casting a heavy fly. So a heavy line will move a heavy fly. But if you're fishing little spiders and small dry flies and things like this, these lines the flies are so light that if you had to pick one of those balls to throw at a fish, you're going to throw the table tennis ball, right? Because it's not going to scare the fish. And so when you fish lightweight flies, you want lines that are very light, don't have a lot of mass and power. And when you fish heavy flies, you want very powerful fly lines. And of course, there's in-between lines, right? There's all-round lines that are generally going to do a bit of everything. They're going to throw a streamer and heavy-ish fly okay, and they can present a nymph and soft spidery thing and a dry fly pretty easily. But if you focus on one discipline, like if you go up to the bow and you take your regular trout line and start fishing very heavy flies, you're going to say, well, I can't cast anymore, right? Because the line has too much weight at the back and too thin at the front. It cannot move this heavy fly. So when you really get into line design and understanding fly line design, you're going to understand 2 things. One, you always start with the fly and come back from the fly to set up the perfect casting outfit. So you might find, I don't have any of my big tandem streamers here, but I got some double streamers. You might find that you've got some big flies to cast like that. You know this is a big fly. You've got to have a fairly short, stiff leader. You've got to have an aggressive fly line. You've got to have a rod to cast that aggressive fly line. It's almost you work backwards to get the perfect setup for the complete combination of effortless casting. If that makes sense? Rather than most people, they buy a rod and they say, oh, I'll take a 5-weight line. Oh, and I'm going to stick on a bit of 10 foot of maxima, and I'm going to put on my fly and I'll change my fly. And then somehow the casting goes off. And that's because it isn't perfectly tuned in for what you're trying to achieve. So that's an introduction to it. The complicated part is this. The most complicated part, you probably don't need to know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. when you sit down to design a fly line, right? We sit down at RIO. I don't do any lines designs anymore. Did them for years. You sit down and you have to make a fly line do something. One of the things you sit down, you work is what is the power of the fly line. So first of all, let's get you comfortable with what the power of the fly line is. Line power is how many grains the line weighs every foot. Okay, it's just a number. As it says here, you get the rough idea of it by dividing the head length and the head weight. So imagine this one, if your line is 30 feet long and it weighs 300 grains, its average power is 10 grains per foot. Does that make some kind of sense? It's just a number. It's a simple division. 300 divided by 30 is 10. So its average power is 10 grains per foot. What that means is you could pick 4 different fly lines, all weighing exactly the same, all weighing 300 grains. One of them has 30 grains per foot. One of them has 10 grains per foot. You could even have a 60-foot fly line, which would be 5 grains a foot. So even though the line is exactly the same weight, the end result of that line is a massively different thing, because one is a powerful line, will throw big flies, punch into a wind. You could tie on a sink tip to it, you could put on sinking leaders, and this type of power will cast that big stuff, so will this. And then some of these lines are so light that they're more presentation orientated, so they're better for dry flies and getting this softer presentation on the water. And really, when you look at that, here's an example of a couple of RIO lines. This is the RIO Gold, this is the RIO Outbound Short. You can see this one has 10 grains a foot average, and this one has 6.5 grains a foot average. Who cares? All I want you to understand is the longer the head, the lighter the power of that fly line is going to be. That's the most important part to take away from that. So if you have a line this long, weighing X, and this long line, length weighing X, this will cast big flies, and this one will be more presentation, easier casting skills. Right? So you don't need to know the numbers. The numbers are there for those techno geeks. There's always a geek in there somewhere, an engineer who listens in and goes, but I need to understand why. Why is this shorter line more powerful? Well, that's why. If you're not a geek and you just want to be an angler, you just go, okay, 6 weights this long, I'm going to cast a big flyer, then a 6 weight this long. That's the only part I want you to be happy with. Because then when you buy a fly line, like you got one in your hand, you can say, okay, I want a line to cast a big fly. Is the head this long or is it this long? And then you'll pick the right lines for doing what you need to do. And then the other part that's kind of confusing, bloody fly line design, I tell you, these days has really gone weird. You know these balloon artists who kind of go to kids' parties and make sausage dogs out of balloons? They blow up this long balloon. If you squish one end of that balloon, this end bulges up. Right? And if you squish that end, this end bulges up. So with a fly line, you can do the same thing. You design a fly line. This is called a front-loaded fly line. Again, the head might weigh X, 300, because we're talking about that number. But if you thin out the back end, the front end will be fatter. And here is still weighing 300. This is a rear-loaded line. This line is the one that will cast the big flies, punch into a wind, cast a sink tip, right? It's got a lot more grains per foot. All the grains are squish the balloon up this end. So that line is a perfect shape of line. And when you buy a fly line, you look on the back, you'll always see an image. And when you look at that image, you can see, is it fat at the front? Is it fat at the back? Fat at the back means that's the nicest casting line. It's the most stable casting line. That one is a line that will land gently on the water. That's a great line for roll casting and spay casting if you're doing those kind of things. And the top shape of line is more like your ideal line. Imagine when you're on a lake and you cast your fly out, I don't know, 40 feet, and you strip it back. And now you've only got a couple of feet. If all the weight is at the front, that first cast pulls, so you can get your line out. I jokingly say, you can actually design a fly line to catch more fish. Yeah. I don't know how you do that. How the hell do you make a line catch more fish? The answer is very simple. In that situation, if you're in a lake and you make a 50-foot cast, pull the fly back to 5 feet. If it's front-loaded, one cast, 2 casts and you're back out. Right? Because all the weight's at the front, so it's taking your line out. So you need to take 2 casts to get your line out to the fish. If it's rear loaded like this, the first cast there's no weight, second cast there's a bit more weight, you might need a third cast, you need to add another cast, so you're spending more time casting, less time fishing. So kind of jokingly, you're catching more fish with that front loaded thing because you're doing less casting time. But it's a concept, it's something to keep in mind. Front loaded lines are designed for quick cast, get it out as fast as possible, but they're less stable than the rear loaded lines. And really all that boils down to is understanding this weight. The big flies you need the cricket ball, and the little flies you need the table tennis balls. And then the last little part I'll delve into, this one's called a gold nugget. It's got a gold nugget badge on it. Ooh, I like gold nugget. See, the gold nugget says it right there. What does that mean? This means, like, of all the complicated slides I'm talking about and all the maths and physics of casting and line design, you can forget most of it. But there's 2 things I don't want you to forget. Shorter head, more powerful. Longer head, less powerful. That's one gold, should have put the gold nugget up on that. And here's the other nugget. This one, you know, when a lot of people go casting and they don't really achieve the perfect end result of their cast every time. Sometimes make a good cast and sometimes they don't make a good cast and they don't quite technically understand why. Well, a lot of it is because people don't know what this hinge point is. The hinge point refers to, like at RIO, we make all our lines, it'll be 2 colored. So here's this great big fat green piece here. It's getting down, it's thinning out, and then there's a color change. So what we've done here, this color change tells you that's the hinge point, right? There's the fat part, and there's the thin part. Okay, so just for terminology, let's call that a hinge point. So the reason it's important to understand where this is that when you make your final cast and you want to make your longest distance cast, if the hinge point is inside the rod rings, when you make your last cast and let go, this line is thick, has lots of friction through the rod guide, and it doesn't give you a very long cast. If you had the hinge point at the tip of the rod, when you make your final cast, this thing will go forever. This is the longest casting section you'll get because all the fat is outside pulling and all the thin is inside sliding through the rod rings. So you get your best performance cast when you have the hinge point here. And if you decide, yo, I'm a great cast, just made a 60-foot cast, I pulled all this line out and I shot this line and all this line's outside the rod rings, and you say, I'm going to try and cast and the hinge point is way outside the rod. Like, there's the color change. Where it is, here's the color change, right? That's the perfect casting point, the hinge point. Now we're going to get 6 or 7 or 8 feet out. If you try casting this, what you're going to find is that this thin line cannot turn over the thick fat line. You can see, look, even with this thin line hasn't got enough energy to move the fat. But if you have the fat line here, there's a lot more energy, right? Because the fat line has mass. So the hinge point is that critical point on your final cast. If you really want to get the best out of your fly line, then very simply, every time you cast, make a couple of false casts, lengthen your line until that hinge point is at the tip ring, and then make your final cast, and that'll give you the best performing. Some lines aren't multicolor, but you can kind of feel it. You run your fingers through the line, you go, or what I do is when I got one color lines, I just literally compare, well, that's the same diameter, and that's about the same diameter, and you keep doing that until you find where the diameter starts to change, and you can get one of these little black, Sharpie pens, and you can just kind of mark on your fly line where the hinge point is. So if you have a 1 color line, mark that hinge point, and again, it just gives you a reference point for that final cast to get the best performance. And this gives you an idea of a couple of lines we have at RIO. This one's got a 47-foot head. This one's got a 30-foot head. So this one, the hinge point's a lot further away. I got a lot of line in the air before I even get to that shooting point. And this one, 30 feet, I only need 30 feet and I'm at the hinge point. So again, if I was to have the same length of line on both same rod, same length of line with different lines like this. One line is going to shoot beautifully at from 30 feet and go all the way out, and the other line is going to suck because all the fat stuff's back here. You know, it's like there's 30 feet. I'm nowhere near the hinge point.
Can I ask a daft question?
No such thing as daft, please.
So if you, it might be a silly question, would you therefore adjust the hinge point depending on the way the fly is on? If you were wanting to change a line or whatever?
You wouldn't adjust the hinge point, but you get more. When you have a heavy fly, the hinge point is very, very essential because every single unit of energy you make in a cast needs to go into moving that heavy fly. So you can get away more with lighter flies missing the hinge point by 3, 4, 5 feet. But when you have a heavy fly, you've got to be so spot on to make that line perform. So you wouldn't make that adjustment. You just have more freedom if your fly is a lightweight little thing like this soft hackle spidery thing. Whereas this one, it would require a very precise load spot.
Fly changeable weight of the fly. So say you're out and the wind got
Yeah.
wanted to change the weight of the fly. Should you then deliberately think about changing the hinge?
No, because the hinge point is going to be still based on that where that diameter changes. So regardless of fly, you would still keep that hinge point to get the maximum performance. If the wind gets up, if your wind gets up, you should have when the wind gets up, yes. The hinge point's not going to change because that's just a function of the physics, right? The rod has this taper and it's getting thinner and thinner, and if your fly line maintains that diameter and keeps going like that, then that is a perfect flow of energy. So if you were to extend this thin line between the two, the energy goes through the rod into this thin and can't move the thick. So you still keep the hinge point. You just have to cast harder or tighten up your loop or do some other casting trick, but the hinge point wouldn't help too much on that one. Where the hinge point does become a problem, and again, this might make sense and might not make sense. Let's say in this line, you make a 50-foot cast. Right? The head is 30, the hinge point's 30. Then you let out 20 feet more line out into the middle of the lake, and then a fish rises. With that line, you have to frantically strip all your running line back to bring the hinge point to the rod tip. Then you can pick it up, and then you can change direction. With a top line, 47-foot head, you can make that 50-foot cast, and a fish rises there, and you can just pick it straight up, put it straight back. You can change direction so much quicker because you don't have this floppy, skinny piece in between the rod and the head, which is why the best technical dry fly fishing line is a double taper shape. Not because of tapers. So many people think, oh yeah, it's got the long front taper. No, of course not. You can make a double taper with a 1-foot front taper if you want. You can make a weight forward with a 20-foot front taper if you want. The reason a double taper is the best type of dry fly line, and I use it on lakes and lochs more than anything else, is that when you've made a cast, there is no hinge point anywhere. So you can pick up any length. If you're a really good technical caster and you're fishing dry flies, I fish Missouri in Montana a lot, and that's an incredibly technical dry fly. You have to stand a long way back from the fish. You make very long casts, making 60 or 70-foot casts to a rising fish, and your fly goes over the fish if you're lucky and he spurns it. With a double taper line, you can pick up the whole 65 feet and go straight back to the spot. So I can lock my length of line in my finger. I know I've got the exact cast. That's the perfect drift. He didn't take it. I can pick that double taper up and do it again and again, and I can change my fly holding this spot, and I'm always precisely fishing over that fly, over that fish. With this line, if you make that 65-foot cast, you're going to have to pull all this in, pick it up, and shoot it all back out again. So you can't be precise on the control of your casting length. So in summary, and this is where the talk's about to end, the longer the head, the more control you have on that, and the shorter the head, the more power you have in your fly line for casting big flies. And really, again, that was the idea of this talk, was just to maybe people aware, anyone who's interested, is that lines aren't all the same. Even if they say 6 on a box, they're not all the same. They have different head lengths, they have different shapes, fat ends, thin ends, they have different power grains per foot. But if you understand that, and you know that you want a powerful line, get a short head, and you want this hinge point far out for technical fishing, get a long head. It was I could have said that at the beginning and done it in 1 minute, but then you didn't have the ammo to understand the theory behind it. What questions? Any questions from any of that?
Yeah.
It was a good, very good question. Thank you for asking a question. I love people asking questions.
Still shoot at the double T?
Oh, that's a bloody brilliant question. No. You can, but not as far. So if you had 50 feet of each out, the double taper, you'd shoot 6 feet, and a weight forward, you'd shoot 20 foot more. You'd shoot an extra 6 feet, an extra 20, because the friction through the rod rings is too much. So that is the downside. I'm making the double taper sound like a great line. The downside is to make a 70-foot cast, you've got to be pretty good. You've got to have about 70 feet out.
20 false cast.
Yeah, to get out to that spot. So it is a bit more difficult. Very good. Anyone else? Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for hanging around. I know it was a very convoluted, mixed up bloody conversation on numbers and physics, but I'm a bit of a geek on fly lines. But thank you for hanging around, and apparently got a casting demo at 1 o'clock. If you want to see that, we'll be outside at 1 o'clock doing a casting demo, and then at 2 o'clock we're doing one on spey lines. And if you thought this was complicated, salmon lines are even worse. So thank you, and ask any questions. If you see me, ask any questions you like, and I'll happily help out.
Thanks, Simon.
No, thank you.